following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back when Bums and Jints played in New York way back then. Alan Blumkin and Noel Hynd, the two mavens of the day, are with us. How are you, sir?
I'm okay.
I'm okay. When I say sir, you're both sirs. How are you, Alan?
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't know whether to respond to sir or not. I don't normally.
Yes. Well, means we're Army officers.
Yeah.
Well, respected Army officers too, I might add. I'm going to let you guys take it today. You're going to talk about relievers on both, all three teams in the 50s, the Yankees, the Giants, and the Dodgers all had very, very interesting bullpens and stories to tell. I'll let you start out, Alan Blumkin.
Okay, the Yankees had unusual relievers during the decade of the 50s. The first one they had was a pitcher who had really only two effective seasons, 1947 and 1949, named Joe Page, who, when he was on, was very good, but Joe his career was diminished because he liked to hit the sauce. Okay.
Imagine that.
Yeah. And then they made a trade in 1951 with Washington, where they got Bob Cazava, who had 4 effective years with the Yankees. He saved the last game of the 51 World Series and the last game of the 52 World Series. And in the 52 World Series, he came in with the bases loaded because he had had good success against Duke Snider in the International League, and he got Snider, and he got Robinson to pop up where Billy Martin made that sensational catch, and the Dodgers couldn't do anything off Cazava in the 2 and the third innings, and they won the 52 World Series. In 1951, at the end of near the end of that season, the Yankees acquired one of the erstwhile aces of the Boston Braves, named Johnny Sain, who later would go on to be possibly the greatest pitching coach in the history of baseball. And they got Sain, who was having a very bad year for the Braves, for $50,000, and a pitcher named Lou Burdette, who would come back to haunt them 6 years later. And Sain was a reliever for about 3 years. He was a spot starter. And then, as these two guys started to fold, he did almost the unthinkable. He made Allie Reynolds a reliever in 1953. Reynolds had, in 52, he was 20 of 8, led the American League in ERA. And in 1953, he didn't have enough innings to qualify it, because Stengel used him in relief an awful lot. And Reynolds also was the primary reliever in 1954, and he retired after that season. Then they had a pitcher named Bob Grimm, who won 20 games in his rookie year, 8 of which were in relief. And that was his rookie of the year, and that was basically his own, out of this world season. He came down with arm trouble, and they made him a relief pitcher, which he did for a few years before they sent him to Kansas City, where all good Yankees went to die in those days. And finally, the last one I want to mention is Ryan Duran, who the Yankees had gotten from I believe it was the Browns, and he came up and he had a tremendous fastball. He would come in, he had thick glasses, and he would come in to relieve, and the first of his warm-up pitches would go inside, and the second one would go over the batter's head. Well, it would have been the batter's head, and that made him a lot more effective. And he had two really effective years in 1958 and 1959. He broke his wrist near the end of the 59 season trying to leapfrog out of the Yankee bullpen in the old Yankee Stadium. And in 1960 and 61, their primary reliever was Louis Arroyo. So that's a little bit of a history of the Yankee relievers.
That's a very good and very concise history. I wanted to actually, before we move on to the other teams, if I could throw a question or two at you, Alan,
sure.
about those. Just mentioning Ryan Duran, wasn't he in? I'm going to work backwards a little bit. Wasn't Ryan Duran in that huge trade that the Yankees made with St. Louis hyphen Baltimore?
No, they got him. They got him separately. I think it was a swap of players in the minors because Duran really didn't come up, for a number of years.
Okay. I know Duran had a strange stat. He pitched, I believe, in one game for the Baltimore Orioles, just one, and then surfaced later, obviously, with Kansas City and the Yankees.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He came to the Yankees from not the Browns, from Kansas City, like all.
That's right.
Yeah, like they always did in those last several years.
That's right. In fact, he was in the Billy Martin trade, wasn't he?
Maybe I'll have to look that up. I think you might be right.
I think he was in 1957 when they were trying to unload Martin, and came up with a bunch of people who most Yankee fans had never even heard of.
Well, the big one they got in that trade was Suitcase Simpson.
Right.
Who had a very big year for Kansas City in 1956, but Stengel, for whatever reason, couldn't stand him, and he fell off, and then they sent him back to Kansas City in 1958.
Okay. Was Harry Simpson? He was African American, wasn't he?
Yes. He came out of the Negro Leagues and had a couple of sensational years in the Pacific Coast League, but once he got to the major leagues, he was up and down.
Sometimes Stengel's attitude towards African American players, let's just say could be a little bit questionable. Would I be correct on that?
Yes. Well, he made a comment about Olson Howard. Says, I finally got one and he can't run.
Yeah, exactly.
But Stengel was a product of his times.
Yeah, we all are.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Speaking of Stengel and going back to Bob Kuzawa, you gave me a good lead-in. Didn't Kuzawa fall into disfavor with Stengel, and wasn't that one of the reasons he got shipped away?
Yeah, I think it was probably a combination. I don't know enough. Nothing personal came out during those years. But the Yankees at that point, once they assumed the player would outlive his usefulness, they would get rid of him.
Yes, and sometimes even before. But they were usually a pretty good judge of unloading people and stealing off the best player from another team.
Yeah, it was Weiss, as much as George Weiss, the general manager, as much despised as he was by players, was a genius and to some extent in deciding who to keep and who to get rid of.
Am I correct that Weiss had an agreement with the ownership that he got a bonus for keeping players' salaries under a certain
I think he did.
level?
Yes, like Branch Rickey had. And those, Weiss and Rickey were by far the two best, general managers of that age.
Yeah, they would, of course, never get away with something like that today.
Oh, no.
Because stuff is much more transparent, and, of course, players were not bound by the reserve rule, so they could, if you weren't getting what you wanted from the Yankees or the Dodgers, you could take the services somewhere else.
Now, the Dodgers had, it wasn't quite as bad as the Yankees with the Kansas City A's, but the Dodgers unloaded a lot of people on the Cubs in those years.
Yeah, very true. I can remember there was a lot of ex-Dodgers going to the Cubs. Of course, back then the Cubs had won a pennant in 1945, and nobody realized what a long. How could you realize what a long drought they were going into?
There was a story that Bill Veeck told. Veeck's father was a longtime GM of the Cubs, and when Veeck was fairly young, he got a job with them. And as you know, Dizzy Dean had his toe broken in the 1937 All-Star game, and never really recovered from that. He came down with a sore arm. So Ricky was running the Cardinals at the time, and he offered Phil Wrigley, Dean, for $185,000 in the number of players. And Bill Veeck said he told Wrigley that if you do this trade, you're going to be a laughing stock for years. And Wrigley said, I'm going ahead with it. So Ricky unloaded players to the Cubs when they were done, when he was with the Cardinals and with the Dodgers.
Interesting.
And a couple of general managers in the Cubs were ex-Dodger employees. So
it made it a receptive market.
Oh yeah.
Going back to Ali Reynolds, didn't he have a hunting accident or something?
No, basically what happened to him is that they had they were taking a bus from New York to Philadelphia, and the bus got involved in an accident, and Reynolds wrenched his back at that time. So he couldn't, after 1953, he couldn't pile the innings up anymore, and he relieved, and he wound up 13-4, and he retired after that season. And he asked the boy, he says, "My back hurts. I couldn't train like I used to." And they got rid of Vic Raschi to the Cardinals, and he proved that he was done. He gave up he gave up the initial home run to Henry Aaron, and the initial one to of Whitey Ford's 3 home runs when Raschi was with the 1955 Kansas City A's.
Okay. You get to tell us what Ali Reynolds' nickname was.
Super Chief.
And that was because? Because
he was part Indian.
Yeah, he was a member of the Creek Nation, apparently. Okay. Those are my questions. Should I talk about Hoyt Wilhelm for the Giants a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, and then we're going to go back to the Dodgers. If we're talking about relievers, really, Wilhelm was one of the, if they had a special Hall of Fame for relief pitchers, you have to figure that Hoyt Wilhelm would be way up top in the as one of the real gods. The man pitched for, I believe, 20-some years. He was a rookie for the New York Giants in 1952, and I believe he was like 27 or 29 years old when he made his first appearance. He'd been in World War II and then kicked through the minor leagues a little bit, and as I think he had the knuckleball all of his career. I'll tell you one. So he was kind of an anomaly, and as you know, he just kept pitching and pitching and pitching. He ended up with, of all people, the Dodgers. I believe, in 1971-72.
Right. Yeah.
And had stops with the Cardinals, the Indians, Baltimore, Chicago, Angels, Braves, Cubs, all along the way. He was, to some degree, he was sort of part of the persona, I would say, of the Giants in the 1950s. I don't know how many games he ever started, but he was pretty much, at least with the Giants, he was pretty much always a relief guy and always with the knuckleball. I'll tell you a quick story. I got the interview several years ago. Jerry Schwab, who was the son of Matty Schwab, who was the groundskeeper at the Polo Grounds, and the Schwabs were the family that lived in an apartment under the left field grandstand. And Jerry and a couple of the other kids of the players, including Chris DeRocher and Larry Jansen's son, used to run around and hang around with the players, and as long as you didn't interfere with things, you were good. So Hoyt Wilhelm was apparently a pretty decent and engaging and generous guy, and Jerry wanted to pitch for his high school baseball team, so Hoyt Wilhelm actually taught him how to throw a knuckleball. So Jerry was not the greatest athlete, but he was the star in the team because he had a pitch that could really jump around a little bit. Do you have, Alan, do you have memories of Wilhelm against the Dodgers?
No, not really.
Okay. Who would have been the who would have been the parallel relievers with the Dodgers during the Wilhelm years, like in the early 50s and mid-50s?
Basically.
Yeah. Who later surfaced with the Mets. Lucky soul that he was.
He went to the Pirates from the after 1959. He went from the Dodgers to the Pirates, and he was on the 1960 Pirates. He's one of the handful of players that were on two consecutive World Series winners with different teams, because he's with the Dodgers in 1959 out in Los Angeles, and then he was with the 60 Pirates, even though he didn't really contribute much.
That's right, because they had Elroy Face at the time, I would guess.
He was behind Elroy Face. And he was one of the... by that time, he was one of the pitchers at the Yankees club in that World Series. Right.
And then basically with the Mets, he was... he still a...
He only had two or three games with the Mets. He didn't stay there very long. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember the Mets in those years would get almost anybody who still had a pulse, who had worn the Dodger uniform.
Well, Hoyt Wilhelm basically had a personal catcher in his later years with the Giants named Ray Cott.
Oh yeah,
and Cott set all sorts of pass ball records because of Wilhelm's knuckleball.
Yeah, he was sort of the National League version of Gus Triandos, who had to catch.
And Wilhelm Wilhelm, when he got to Baltimore, was made into a starter. And in 1959, he started off 9-0. He had pitched a no-hitter against the Yankees in late 1958, and he won the ERA crown in the American League in 1959. And this is after winning the NL ERA crown when he was with the rookie with the Giants in 1952. But he and Marv Grissom were the two big relievers for the Giants when they won the World Series in 1954.
Right. And then later on, there was a guy named Windy McCall, who you probably remember. And wasn't Steve Ridzik a reliever for a while?
Yeah, a little while, yeah.
And go ahead.
Don Little. Don Little was the one who gave up the ball at Dick Wart's hit, where made the was described as the catch in the first game of the 1954 World Series. And supposedly when Grissom came in to relieve him after that one batter, Will gave him the ball and says, well, I got my man.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he was right. He did.
Yeah.
And, of course, a generation of Giant pitchers would say that if you can just get them to hit a fly ball anywhere to center field or right center or left center, Mays is going to catch it. So it really became, your best pitch. Anything you could get somebody to hit in the air to center field, you're going to get it out on it. So, while it's a funny remark, it was actually the perfect strategy. It just happened to be one of the most iconic plays that ever happened in baseball. I remember on the subject of Wilhelm. Wilhelm had such a long career that there are so many great stories about him. I remember in 1960, I guess it was, Baltimore was taking a late run at the Yankees for the pennant, and they had the big four-game series at Yankee Stadium. And in the Friday night game, Baltimore was leading. I'm working completely from memory now, so who knows where this is going to go. But I do remember Baltimore was leading by a run. It was maybe the eighth inning, and it was maybe 3-2. Mantle was up with a man on base, and Wilhelm got Mantle to pop a foul ball up behind the plate. And, of course, Gus Triandos, who was the catcher, was using this specially made, oversized glove to try to cut down on pass balls. So he comes back, and Triandos, who'd also been a first baseman, was a very good catcher, goes to catch the ball. The ball hits off the lip of the oversized glove and drops, and Mantle hits the next pitch into the lower deck. The Yankees lead 4-3, I think it was, and then the Yankees continued and won on Saturday, and then they won the doubleheader on Sunday, and that was the end of the Baltimore Orioles with Chuck Estrada, and I think Jim Gentile was on that team.
Yeah,
very good.
Pappas
very good Baltimore team.
Pappas and Steve Barber, I think, were the other baby birds in those years. Yeah, and Jack Fisher.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jack Fisher, and I think they hadn't Louis Aparicio gone to the team by then?
No, he was there. He was there a couple of years later. The shortstop was Ron Hansen.
Ron Hansen, who I think was the Rookie of the Year that year.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I missed that series because that was the year I was a freshman at Pittsburgh, and I couldn't see any of those games.
You were at Pittsburgh at Pitt when they won the World Series in 1960?
Oh yeah, I got into a friend of mine and I snuck into Forbes Field in the top of the ninth inning, Game 7. We were watching the game in the student union, and after Hal Smith hit the home run, my friend says to me, "Let's go over there and see if we can get in." We're 17 years old at the time. So we went over there and we got into the left field bleachers just as right after Mantle dove back into first base. We were basically on our knees, so when it wouldn't have struck anybody's view, and the security was busy watching the game, so we were there for the Mazeroski home run. And we could have had a pin drop between the time the ball was hit until the time it went over the left field wall, and who knows, we would have. We might have been arrested if that game had gone any further. But we got in, and I picked up a program on the way out for 50 cents, which I still have.
Do you still have it?
Yeah.
There you go. And let's see, so who was the winning pitcher of that game?
Harvey Haddix.
That's right.
It was a very unusual World Series. Ford won 2 games for the Yankees. Haddix and Law won 2 games each for the Pirates. And Ralph Terry lost 2, Bob Friend lost 2, and Art Ditmar lost 2.
Yeah, and the Yankees, outscored them something like 56 to 22 or
55
something.
to 27. I did my first. I was lucky enough to be able to interview Dick Groth in 1985, and I did my first presentations at SABR meetings at Society of American Baseball Research.
Yeah.
On the interview I did with Groth, and I cut it down to the last 2 innings of Game 7, for time.
Uh-huh.
And so Groth and I went over that, and I asked him what was the attitude after they was slaughtered in Game 3 after being slaughtered in Game 2. He says, Bartos said, they only lead us 2-1 in games.
Yeah.
And it was, unbelievable that I asked Groth if it meant as much as they had beaten the Indians or the White Sox or some other American League team. He said no.
Yeah. Didn't they lose one game like 16-1 and another one like
they lost 16-3, 10-0, and 12-0. Those are the 3 losses.
Yeah. I don't think there's ever been another World Series like
quite
that.
Like this.
Had,
no.
A 4-3 World Series, but the 3 sounded like football scores.
Yeah. The pitchers got knocked out. The starting pitchers got that very early. I was Friend twice in Game 2 and Game 6, and Vinegar Ben Mizell started Game 3, and I think they got 5 or 6 runs off of him and right away in Game 3, and they lost that. They lost that one 10-0.
Mizell was kind of a strange guy, wasn't he? I know he was with the Cardinals, and they had, when they signed him, they thought he was going to be a great left-hander, and he had a funny career because he had a way of surfacing with winning teams, but never really seemed to fulfill his, what people had predicted for him. And then he kind of became a redneck congressman from
North Carolina,
Yeah. Was it North Carolina?
Or North Carolina, yeah.
Yeah.
Am
I correct?
Yeah, he was only with the Cardinals and the Pirates. He tried out with the Mets in 1962, and they couldn't stick with them. I think he spent 2 years in the Army between his rookie year and they came out. So basically, he was one of those. I lost it in the Army Brigade. I remember watching him when they played the Giants. Anytime Willie Mays got on first base against Mizell, you could be assured that he would get to third base before the next batter, did anything. Because Mizell had a very, very bad pickoff move. He
had a very high kick, too, didn't he?
Yeah. Very bad pickup. But when the Pirates got him in June 1960 for basically for Julian Javier, who couldn't beat out Bill Mazeroski, Javier went on to have a very good career with the Cardinals. Mizell was 13-5 that season. But that was it. He was very ineffective in 1961, and that was basically the end.
The Mizell for Javier trade was an excellent one for the Cardinals.
Actually, because Javier was stuck behind Mazeroski.
Right. And Mizell, I always felt, was a suspect pitcher. And the Cardinals got an all-star second baseman for 8 years out of the deal.
Yeah, well, the Pirates had somebody like him starting. He later on became a pretty good relief pitcher, Ron Klein.
Yeah.
Who was another one. And Klein, after 59, they sent Klein to the Cardinals for Gino Cimoli, who played a decent role in this series. When he started the rally in the 8th inning of Game 7 when Kubek was hit in the throat.
Right. Cimoli owns a strange bit of Dodger history. Can you tell me what it is? You probably know.
No, I don't.
I think Cimoli was the first Los Angeles Dodger to score a run in Los Angeles, and I believe he also either scored or had the last RBI at Ebbets Field. So Cimoli kind of spanned the two continents with the Dodgers and was actually very proud of it, from what I read recently.
Yeah,
So it's funny because he was kind of a regular player for a couple of years, but contributed a couple of footnotes to Dodger history, if I recall.
Yeah, the Dodgers sent him to the Cardinals after 1958 for Wally Moon, who gave him 4 excellent years when they played in the Los Angeles Coliseum. In fact, I was looking at Moon's page in the Baseball Reference a little while ago, and Moon's best year was 1961, which was the last year in the Coliseum. And when they moved into Dodger Stadium, he started to fade.
Well, yeah, that inside-out swing. Yeah. I remember he was a left-handed hitter, but he learned how to take an outside pitch to the screen in the Coliseum.
Oh, yeah.
They were called moon shots, and he had a way of dropping a fly ball just over the screen.
Yeah, that's. I have his autobiography that came out a few years ago, and the name of the book is Moonshots.
Yes, but it was funny because he was. He really became one of the Dodgers' first stars in Los Angeles. No pun on Moon with mentioning stars, but he was kind of an attraction. There are some games on YouTube from the Coliseum, and they're absolutely fascinating to watch. There's one I know with I think it's the Cardinals at Los Angeles. Might be like June of 1959, and it is very strange to see some of the players and people who are in that game. Rip Rapolsky, who I always think of with the Cardinals or the Phillies, was with the Dodgers for a while, and was a very much a contributing player to some of the Dodgers' early success in California.
Well, Duke Snider was, in some ways, very happy to get home.
Yeah.
And until he took a look at the Coliseum dimensions.
Yes, exactly. I came across an interesting, getting back to Brooklyn, observation from Snyder a couple of weeks ago. He was talking about the difference between playing in the Polo Grounds and at Ebbets Field. And he said that at Ebbets Field when he was hitting, he always felt that if he got the ball in the air, it had a good chance of going out or at least hitting the wall. And he would come up to bat in the Polo Grounds, and he would see that center field, which was 480-some feet or whatever, and it was almost a psychological thing where you now realized you had to pull the ball or slap it the other way. So while he made the seats in the Polo Grounds many times, I would make a bet that his overall percentage in Ebbets Field was a lot higher than when he was a visiting player in northern Manhattan.
Yeah, one of the things that he had, that he was, one of the Boys of Summer were in their prime, is that he was the only left-handed hitter.
Yeah.
Because the rest of them were right-handed.
Right. Carrillo was right-handed, Campy.
Campy, Hodges, Robinson, and Reese were all right-handed. And Warren Spahn, for all his greatness, could not pitch in Ebbets Field. He had a terrible record in Ebbets Field, and it was so bad to the point where they wouldn't start him there.
Yeah, in fact, I think against the Dodgers was the only team that Spahn had a losing record against.
Yeah. I mean, he did decently against them when they moved to Los Angeles, but he was only effective for a few years there, and it wasn't enough to overcome the record he posted in Ebbets Field. He just couldn't pitch there against them. Most left-handers couldn't.
I remember seeing a game at the Polo Grounds. I guess it was about 62 or 63. Spahn was still with the Braves, and he had a 3-2 lead against the Mets in the bottom of the ninth inning. And the Mets had a man on, and Hobie Landreth comes up to hit. Landreth was hitting like 228, certainly not a home run threat, but somehow Landreth gets a hold of a ball that goes floating down the right field line about 265 feet, goes into the first row of the lower deck, and my father and I were sitting in the first row behind the press box in the upper deck at the Polo Grounds, and I could practically see the expression on Spahn's face, where he looks at this thing and realizes he's not just been beaten by the Mets, but beaten by a 260-some foot home run, and Landreth is circling the bases. And that's kind of when my lasting memory of Warren Spahn, who then, of course, later on pitched for the Mets for a few years.
I read that he tore up the locker room after that game.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I never knew that, but I'm sure not surprised because he looked like he could barely hold it in after that.
No, that was one of his worst losses.
It was horrendous. It really was.
Well, Bob Lemon pitched the whole game in 1954, Game 1. And, Ward hits the ball 460 feet, and Mays catches it, and then Dusty Rhodes comes up in the bottom of the 10th and hits it into the first row in the right field stand, right down the line.
It was almost exactly the same place. And back then, of course, if you hit to hit a ball into the lower deck, it had to be either a line drive or really just a humpbacked low fly ball, because you couldn't hit anything really high would go into the second deck or over the roof.
Didn't Bobby Thompson's home run go into the first deck?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
That was pretty well hit, but it would have been caught, I believe, in almost any other ballpark.
Yeah. That was, the Yankee Stadium dimensions in those years was, there was a murder on right-handed hitters who had power to left center.
Mm-hmm.
The Yankees had DiMaggio hit, I think only 40% of his home runs, career home runs were hit there. And then they had guys like Hank Bauer and Moose Skowron with pretty good power, and their home run totals at Yankee Stadium were pretty low.
Yeah.
So the big thing back then is that almost all the ballparks that were in use then all had quirks.
Yes, usually dictated by the parcel of land upon which the ballpark had been built.
The city blocks, basically, yeah.
Yeah, didn't League Park in Cleveland have some weird dimensions? Like it was like three. It was a heavy 300 just down the left field line or something. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, before Vec bought the team in the 40s, they would play the weekday games at League Park and the weekend games in the Municipal Stadium. And I read years ago, the autobiography of Lou Boudreau, and he said it was like playing 3/4 of the season on the road. They had to adjust, and then when Vec bought the team, he pulled the team out of League Park and started playing all the games in the Municipal Stadium. They used to move.
That's go ahead. That's exactly.
Yeah, he used to move the center field fences in and out depending on who they were playing until the league passed a rule against it.
Yeah. Well, he didn't announce it. I just know that if they were playing the St. Louis Browns, the fences would come in. If they were playing the Yankees, the fence would go back.
Yeah. And they asked him why he did that. He says there's no rule against it.
Yeah.
So
well, in the minor leagues, didn't Breck pull a stunt where he had a screen with, maybe it was with the Milwaukee Brewers, where he tried to put the screen up when the opposing team was hitting, and would wheel it back when Milwaukee was up.
Yeah. I want to say a couple of words about Clem Labine.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
He came up in 1951 because the Dodgers had Charlie Dressen as the manager, and I think he was terrible, especially the way he handled pitchers. And Clyde King burned his arm out in July or August, and they brought Labine up. And what happened with Labine is that he was pitching a game against the Phillies in early September, and he violated instructions by Dressen from throwing from a windup with the bases loaded, and Pudd'nhead Jones hit him for a Grand Slam home run. So he shut him down the rest of the season. And Labine started the second game of the playoff series against the Giants and pitched a shutout. The Dodgers won that game 10-0. He put Labine in because he was desperate. And then Labine was the stopper. I mean, I had a couple of others like Ed Roebuck and a couple of others during those years. But I think Don Besant was a starter, was a reliever. And the Dodgers had to start Labine in Game 6 of the 1956 World Series, and he beat Bob Turley 1-0 in 10 innings. On a hit by Jackie Robinson, that was the only run that the Dodgers scored in the last 3 games of that series.
Mm-hmm.
Because Lawson pitched the perfect game, but they won the 6th game 1-0, and then Johnny Cook shut them out in the final game. Yankees had 5. Yeah, go ahead.
Labine, if I remember, was a World War II veteran too, wasn't he?
Yeah. And in the Roger Kahn chapter on him and Boys in Summer, he had a son who was distant because Labine was away so much when he was playing that lost a leg in Vietnam.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Labine's son.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I know he was with the Tigers for a short time too, Labine.
Yeah.
Very briefly.
Very short, yeah.
1960 or so. Okay. Ralph, are you still with us?
No, I don't think.
Oh, okay. It's just us today.
Yeah, I think he left.
Okay. Should we wrap up then? I think
we've
gone over the relievers pretty well.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's always an education to listen to you. So I'm going to sign off on Ralph's behalf, Noel Hynd, and
Alan
go
Blumkin.
ahead, Alan. You can. So we will meet again sometime soon and talk more about the Giants and the